I've got a question for you. Are you a pressed and stressed exec? A PSE, as I like to say, a pressed and stressed exec. I heard this phrase some time ago, and it really struck me because I think this is so much of us running around pressed and stressed. And I don't mean to laugh in terms of thinking, oh, that's funny, but like, oh, that's not good. And sometimes when we laugh, it is a diffuser of anxiety, just saying. So that's kind of what I was doing. On the topic, though, I want to dive into that today. Are you a pressed and stressed exec? I want to talk about some things that I talk about in my keynotes and my speaking engagements on a regular daily, not daily, but like cadence of at least weekly. And I want to bring it here because I think it could really serve so many folks, because I think a lot of times we're just doing what we do, doing our to-do list, running around, being the executives that we are meant to be and leading in really good ways. However, how is that doing on us, taking a toll on us? Is it not? How's our body holding up physically? How are we emotionally and mentally holding up? I know so many individuals who are experiencing stress in it, and it manifests in ways that show up like back pain or heart palpitations. We're not talking small, minor things here. However, that's how it can start. So I want to take a deep breath into this today as we settle into this topic, because we need to disrupt the patterns we have built over the years, over the decades of our lives, literally, because that's what we know. That's our autopilot mode. And if we aren't able to just pattern disrupt at any given moment, then chances are we're not able to change things in a way that could be as efficient or as easily as they could be. So one of the best ways I know for disrupting our own patterns is a state shift, and a breath literally can be that way to go. It's free. It doesn't take a lot of time, and we all breathe. We all know how to do it. So if you want to join me in this, we're just going to kick things off before I get into the content today. Close your eyes, sit up tall. If it feels good for you to keep your arms and legs uncrossed, I invite you to do so. If you're able to close your eyes, great. If not, no worries. Just take a deep breath in through your nose, holding this breath at the top, feeling those lungs expand behind, in front, and at your sides. And then slowly exhale and almost double that time it was in your inhale. Like really pressing out any extra capacity that is left in your lungs. This is a long, exaggerated breath. Let's do one more. We're going to count to 4 on the inhale and hold on for 5 and release for 8. Ready? 3, 4. Hold this breath for 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then exhale for 8 or longer. 3, 4, 5. Letting your body relax, letting your shoulders relax. 6, 7, 8. Hold as long as you can here at this exhale, holding at the bottom of your breath. Open your eyes if they were closed. Return to normal breathing, which might be a gasp. By the way, I am reading James Nestor's breath book. Guess what the average amount of breathing is for an individual for optimized health? 5.5 breaths per minute. Think about that, 5.5, which means you're holding for each breath, it's at least 10 seconds in and out. And a lot of us, most of us don't do that, including myself. But I just bring that in to remind us that we overbreathe sometimes, and we overbreathe to compensate for fear, for feeling stress. We only breathe the first top of half of our lungs. As a breathwork facilitator, I'm very aware of this. And just always bring it back. One of the best tools is the breath. So now that we've reset a little bit, and remember, you can do this at any time. Ask yourself, do I feel different? Is my nervous system in a different place? Because that's really what it's all about. For me, just speaking from my experience, I do feel a little different. I'm literally paying attention to my toes on the floor. and feeling them. So to me, that's a signal I'm feeling grounded and more grounded. I'm more aware of my body on relationship to space and literally time. And that's a good thing. Woo! All right. Give yourself a round of applause, a pat on the back, a tap on the shoulder, because you made it. You got through that. And that's what this is all about. If you are feeling pressed and stressed, a PSE, a pressed and stressed exec, we don't want that. That is not ideal. And the second question I have for you is, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to sustaining yourself? What is your biggest challenge? It might be finding things like quality time with your kids at night, or uninterrupted quality time with your partner, or might be just untethering from your phone. If you're noticing you're kind of getting down into scrolling these days, or wanting to do things different, just notice these. The first step is awareness, because you cannot change anything unless you're aware, right? So the first step is to notice and be objective, not go into anything other than that. Because if we want to really look at this in different ways, then we have to know what we're working with. And each of us might be a little different. And that's the key. Not only are you the holder of the conditions, but you're also the problem solver of the conditions. You can solve these things. It's just a matter of awareness, and also the tools and the discipline to use the tools, right? We can all know these tools. Oh yeah, breath, no problem. But how often are we really doing that? To me, that's a really telltale sign that you're integrating what I'm talking about, which is emotional intelligence mastery for leaders rising to your next level of leadership. And the discipline, the commitment is a lot of times what isn't there, because we're kind of willy-nilly about it. We got one foot in, we got one foot out. Maybe we do it, maybe we don't. And it's all good. It's in service towards you moving forward to those commitments. So just know you're on the path. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So press and stress exec. So if you're like me, high achiever, overachiever, recovering achiever, my guess is if you're listening to this, you are. It's really easy to just go, go, go. That's kind of how we're wired, and it's what we do best. And when we don't allow ourselves to take a time out, to recalibrate, to check in, and even just ask ourselves, how are we doing? We are just much more susceptible to not noticing when we need a shift. And based on my own experience, some of you know my story. I burned out of Google now 10 plus years ago, but it was because I had zero clue to check in with myself. I just didn't know. And you might be thinking, well, I check in with myself. All right, great. Are you feeling like you're thriving? Are you feeling like you've got your being and you're doing nailed down, so you have a consistent, incredible day-to-day life? And if the answer is anything but heck yeah, then we got work to do, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So, I learned the hard way, and my goal is to share these tools so that you don't have to learn the hard way, that you can start to implement these ASAP, like right now, as we are doing in this particular episode, and go forward. What I learned as an achiever is that if we don't make things intentional, we don't do it. We just don't do it. We just keep going, right? We we think of this word pause. I talk about this all the time, and it's more of a passive word. And the key is, it is anything but. Pausing is intentional, and it's any amount of time. It's not related to anything other than intention and what you choose to do. And it can be things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with things like taking a break. So for example, having a risky conversation that you've been avoiding. To me, heck, that's a total pause. Total pause. It's an intentional shift in behavior, because you're disrupting your own pattern and you're doing something different. But back to these pressed and stressed execs, right? So I talk about the 5 signs you need a pause in the book, and a lot of times it's easy to forget. But if you're a pressed and stressed exec, my sense is you experience at least one or more of these 5 signs, and I'll just go through them very quickly. You used to love your job, now you loathe it. That's number 1. Number 2 is you're like someone tells you that it's not working out. It might be called the proverbial pink slip. So maybe it's a conversation, a very informal conversation that maybe there's like things that you need to work on that you had no idea that were even an issue. Your boss might sit you down like mine did and said, this job isn't a fit for you. You might want to do something else. I mean, that's like really obvious. But anything in those lines, it might be like a friend saying, like, is this really the fit that you want to have? Or maybe it's yourself saying, this isn't what I want anymore. Number 3 is a technology intervention. So you or someone in your love, who you love or in your life in a near and dear way tells you like, dude, you got to lay off the phones or put that phone down, or why are you always on your laptop? Why are you always answering emails, mom? Like, partner, whatever it is. So that's number 3. Number 4 is a challenge. So things that are adversity might show up in your life. It might be health related. It could be family related. It could be like a really, grave situation that is challenging. And then number 5 is an opportunity, kind of the opposite side of that. So there might be a passion project you've been itching to start, or a friend invites you for a road trip that you are dying to do. You just want to get away by yourself for a couple days. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So those are the 5 signs. If you would like to just kind of on your own informal tally, quantify how many of those signs do you have. If there's more than one, then that's a sign you need to pause, right? And so as a pressed and stressed exec, what does that mean exactly? And I want to kind of give us all a standard so we can kind of identify what that means. Talking a little bit about burnout. So this term burnout, and I talk a lot about this in my talks too, and my TEDx talk, but burnout was a term that came up in psychology. It's from 1974 when a psychologist by the name of Herbert Friedenberg described it in Caring Professionals. The World Health Organization recognizes this now as a disease. So it has been around for a long time, but it's also uniquely affecting those in demanding roles as well. Like that's kind of how we associate it with it. It can be personal, it can be professional. And how do we change this, or how do we get out of it, right? And according to the World Health Organization, it's characteristically defined as these 3 things. 1, you feel depleted or exhausted. 2, you have increased mental distance from your job or feelings of negativism, or number 3, reduced professional efficacy, just not into it anymore, and you're not necessarily vested. And I think this describes a lot of people. And the stats I know now, 1 out of 3 people are burning out. In healthcare, it's 1 out of 2. COVID didn't help with that much. And I think given our conditions today with media, with politics, and just everything that's kind of 24/7, it's just not getting any better. And then that's the big issue, right? And from a stressed and pressed exec side of things, I want to talk about good stress and bad stress, because actually, believe it or not, you may know this, there's a level of stress that's actually healthy for us. It helps us get deadlines done. It helps us get like feel motivated to do things. And that particular area of stress is called eustress, like eustress, eustress. It's kind of where we can have peak performance. So there's maybe a looming deadline. And how many of us have had that happen, where there's a deadline and then like maybe the deadline's in 2 months, and then we don't do anything until the last 2 weeks, or even the last week, or even the last couple of days. All of a sudden we're cramming, we're doing things. It's because there's a deadline there that's looming for us, and our bodies and brains, they're going, heck, oh my gosh, I got to get this done before then. And that's the stress we feel. And that's the eustress. But we have more time than we need usually, but we wait until the last minute because that stress, we aren't feeling it enough to be motivated. So if there's, so ideally we want to be in that zone of eustress, but oftentimes we go over index on that. And so I want to talk about stress versus burnout, just to kind of give you that understanding of how they're different. And I like this definition of it. So stress is like when there's too much, right? So you're feeling stressed. There's too much work to do. There's too many things on my plate. There's too many responsibilities I manage right now. It's like this too much version. Burnout is almost like this vacuum of lack. We don't have enough. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough, I don't have enough energy to finish this thing. I don't have enough self-care, which is, by the way, a really interesting aspect of this that is part of the equation for feeling better. And we have not enough motivation or time or things like that. So that's how I like to think of it in a way. And especially if there's aspects of this where might seem like there's a little higher risk. So maybe you don't feel like your self-esteem is where it should be. Your confidence is in the toilet. If we have unrealistic expectations, we set deadlines that are just technically impossible to meet given our time frame or what we need for recovery. We know a lot, like this happens a lot because we want to perform well and do good things, but we overshoot a little bit and we give ourselves too much. Well, actually, it's the opposite. We don't give ourselves enough time, but we think we can, and we end up burning the candle at both ends to do something, and then it doesn't feel good, and we just end up missing the mark anyway because we're not taking care of ourselves. So all of that can add up to burnout. And there's actually a curve that's like a bell curve. Imagine a bell curve, the 5 phases of burnout, where that first one is eustress, right? So like you're kind of going up the curve where your stress is low, but your productivity might be getting up and increasing. So that's eustress, and that's healthy, like I said. And then it might become added stress, where there might be physical or mental signs of feeling that stress. There might be loss of focus or productivity. A lot of times when we procrastinate, it's based on fear. We actually feel anxious or fear because there's resistance there, or wow, what if I get this done? Then now what am I going to be responsible for? I really relate to this one. And who are my procrastinators out there, right? We've got it's a natural phenomenon, I would say. But if we're not careful, it can really be detrimental, because then we end up maybe not doing it at all, or losing interest and quitting, or this could be for anything, not just a job, but a project or a passion that you actually really want to do, but we're scared of failure. Believe it or not, that's a lot of times what happens with procrastination. So that's okay, that area. It's kind of like beginning signs of stress, but then I would say like the peak of this, like that top of the bell curve is chronic stress. So when this becomes routine, we feel consistent in feeling that elevated stress. Maybe your cortisol levels are high, right? Cortisol is a naturally occurring hormone. It occurs with circadian rhythms when the sun's out, when we work out, like our bodies produce this. But if we're in stress mode, it over produces it because it's the fight or flight hormone and it's in our body. So if there's no way for it to come down, with other ways to do that, like oxytocin and self-care can really support and improve that, then the chronic stress stays elevated. And then we start to, and then we feel it impacting us at work. We feel potentially apathy or lethargic. For those of you who've listened to the podcast about flow state, I talk about this because it's related to that. It's like the opposite of flow when we're in apathy or feeling lethargic. And it's usually because we need to move out of that zone of feeling that chronic stress. Then beyond that is burnout, right? Like we are in a phase where literally we are consumed by issues, avoidance, extreme self-doubt, and lack of self-confidence. We might avoid altogether, numbness, physical symptoms manifest, like that back pain. We don't feel like we're elevated in a space that feels good. So that burnout's like pretty far down. So now we're over the bell curve on the other side where stress is just maxing out. And then the fifth level is habitual burnout, which is just like that all the time. Can you even imagine? And there are people in this state where you live in anxiety or depression, right? That this is just where you are, and there might be antidepressants or medication involved, chronic mental and physical fatigue. Your job may be in jeopardy because you're not showing up in ways that you could. And we cannot get out of this usually at all unless we seek additional help and do things very different than what we've been taught to do. So those are the 5 phases. It's just real quick. Imagine that bell curve. Eustress, which is kind of that honeymoon phase. Onset of stress, still okay. Yellow zone, we'll call it the peak. The top of that bell curve is chronic stress, and then burnout, and then like basically chronic burnout or habitual burnout. And if you're a stressed and pressed exec right now, just rate yourself. Where would you be on that curve? Maybe you're good. Maybe you're like a 2, right? That you're on the onset of stress. Like sometimes you feel it, but overall you're doing great. Well, that's awesome, right? Because the key is, remember, awareness. The key is, how do I get back to that honeymoon phase? How do I get back to that eustress? And by the way, I'm citing a article from Blank Slate, and I'll put that in the notes of the podcast today. But the idea is that this is not good. We don't want to do that. So how do we get out of there, right? And I think the key is, the first thing is know that pausing is part of the solution, right? Just like that breath that we took in the beginning, we can take right now or anytime. I'm not saying breath is the cure-all, but it is a tool. And pausing is, in my opinion, critical for shifting, because if we aren't able to take a moment and redirect, then how can we know to do anything different? We can't. It's like we're always on autopilot. Intention takes the prefrontal cortex and consciousness to do something different. So pausing is super, super important for us. And as a pressed and stressed exec, we don't have to stay in that zone. So to me, the first key is to know pausing is part of it, in that self-awareness. And then what are your go-to tools? Like maybe there's 1, 2, or even 3 things you would write down right now that are like my state shifter things that I could do differently. And there's a whole bunch of tools that I teach my private clients, my group coaching class, and executive leadership accelerator. Like there's so much to talk about. So we're really just scratching the surface here, but I want you to know that there's some go-tos that you could have. And remember, it's about what works for you. So it might be, you got to listen to your favorite song. That's awesome. Go listen. So take 2 minutes and listen, but then, know there's going to be a voice. There's going to be a little gremlin voice in your mind that says, you don't need to do that right now. You can do it later. That takes up time. You got more shit to do than you think you do, blah, 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 blah. So you got to know that voice is going to try to keep you in your comfort zone and stay the same. That's what its job is to help you stay safe. And your job is to disrupt the pattern, because you're now off of autopilot, to say, hey, actually, I do need to have that song. And thank you for caring, gremlin number 1. But no, not right now. I'm actually really prioritizing this for myself. See, so you can control your thoughts, and you don't have to believe them all. But that's the biggest thing, I think. So what are your go-to places? And they don't need to take time. They could be just like what we did, a breath. Maybe it's a breath. Maybe it's a transition time when you get into the car, when you're at a stoplight, when you're on an elevator, when you're walking up the stairs, like these times when you can give yourself the moment to just say, how am I doing? All right. And if you're over indexing, a lot of times the things that we think might be helping don't. Like, for example, scrolling on our phones is usually a sign of, getting tethered to your device a little too much. So put that phone down for the rest of the afternoon. Maybe that's your pause. There might be something where you have the first 3 bites of a meal feeling very connected to yourself, noticing and sensing with your 5 senses what's happening with you, what the taste, the smell, color, the texture. And what are you hearing when you eat this? There's all kinds of things that you can do to disrupt the pattern there. So I call these all daily pauses. Excuse me, but it's a great way to start to get curious around what's going on, and journaling is another one of those. Okay, so just kind of wrapping this up here. So know that some stress is good. You stressed and pressed execs, you PSEs, it's all good, but we need to self-assess and monitor how we're doing ongoing in order to continue to feel aligned. And if we need to, do things differently. You can also practice daily pauses to refresh and renew. The breath is a very powerful one, and it can be done in no time at all. But that's the key, is to start to create new habits that will help serve you, integrating that doing and your being. And I invite you to try it, try once a day, start that way, but know that you could build up to multiple times a day, 3 times a day. And that could be what I'd call, this ending pause plan, where you have this intention. You're like, okay, now, I don't want to be this stressed out. Like, what's my go-to, that will really serve me throughout my day? Well, maybe at 3 o'clock, I get up, I take a stretch, I walk over to get a drink of water, I look out the window, I give myself 2 minutes, which isn't a lot of time, right? And research tells us every 45 to 90 minutes, by the way, the most productive people on the planet take those breaks every 45 to 90 minutes. And they don't need to be that long, but anything like even 5 minutes, 10, 15, ideal. All right. So how are we feeling about being pressed and stressed at this point? Or what do you want to do differently? I hope this has been helpful and that you walk away just starting some new ways of thinking, knowing maybe there's a sign that you need a pause happening. Maybe you've plotted yourself on the burnout curve and you're like, OMG, I am too far to the right. Where can I, and how can I go back to the left? And that's where I can step in and help. So please let me know how I could serve you. We can hop on the phone. I've got some great tools. I will provide a recommendation based on what your particular challenge is, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.